LinkedIn's finicky about. Yeah. LinkedIn's finicky about it, though, if you don't start it within like 10 minutes or whatever of when it's scheduled.
Oh, really?
So.
That's funny.
Yeah, but it looks like we're live, so we'll see how we get people on. Now, it's funny, too, because it says on the live stream, of course, nobody's on it yet, so but it says Kuby Core. In order to change that, I have to jump through a whole bunch of hoops, so I just skipped it. So we'll just talk about front end anyway, and the two people that have gotten on so far on X, they'll just be aware that it says Kuby and we're talking about front end.
Sounds good.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and do kind of the shouty, excited, announce the show, and then we'll start talking. Here goes. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel, we have Valentino Stoll.
Hey, now.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and we have a special guest this week. It is Cameron Dutro. Cameron, do you want to remind people who you are?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Cameron Dutro. I work at GitHub on the core productivity team, mostly working on the Primer view components, Gem, which is an implementation of the Primer design system. But I've also done other things on the show for this thing called Kuby, which I think is something we talked about last time I was on the podcast. And yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking before the show, and we've covered Kuby. I'll go ahead and put it in the comments here in a minute, the link to that. It sounds like there's not a whole lot to kind of rehash on that would help people out. And so we were talking before the show about kind of the state of the front end with Rails and things like that. Mm-hmm. It sounds like you might have a little bit different take than the people who are sort of raw hotwire. So, yeah, do you want to kind of give us an overview on what you're thinking and what you're looking at, and see where that takes
us? Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you mentioned hotwire. Because hotwire really kicked off, I think, this sort of renaissance in the Rails front end world ecosystem. And I have nothing but good things to say about hotwire. I've seen people. I've also never used it personally on any projects. But I've seen it used. Yeah, for sure. And I've heard you talk about on the podcast before. I think Ayush was on a couple of episodes ago talking about how awesome it is. And yeah, no, I mean, hotwire is great. I think that it really sparked sort of a much needed like injection of passion and sort of new energy into Rails, especially when it comes to the front end, because really, I don't think anybody would argue that the Rails backend is pretty solid, right? Like models and views and controllers, or I guess models and controllers are pretty awesome. They haven't, really changed that much in the 20 years since Rails was first made. You can get really, good performance, speed, I guess is what I mean, like speed of development out of the back end. But the front end has kind of lagged a little bit. And, when I first started at GitHub, I was hired to work on the view component library, or I guess we call it the framework, and also work on Primer view components, which is like an implementation of the Primer design system. But
view components are awesome.
Oh, yeah, dude, I completely agree. I think they're great too. Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that was one of the reasons that was sort of something that came into Joel's mind. Joel Hoxley is the creator of View Component. Mm-hmm. The reason that sort of came into his understanding and his thinking was because of him seeing, the React world, seeing components there, and also just realizing that Rails was kind of having a moment, in those days when it came to the front end. And so more thinking around the front end was sort of happening. And that's why View Component sort of came into existence. And, View Component has been phenomenal. There are some rough edges still to it that as a maintainer of it, I can sort of maybe see, more clearly than other people. But I think for the most part, it works pretty well. The thing, though, about all of the front end in Rails right now is that there just hasn't been a lot of thinking about sort of, reactivity, interactivity in the same way that like the React and the Svelte and the Angular communities think about it, right? And so that's what I've been thinking about lately, has been like, how can we sort of have our Rails cake and our front end cake, I guess. And maybe the front end ice cream, maybe, and eat them together, right?
Right.
So, yeah, that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah,
Actually, to that
it's
point, I saw. Oh, go ahead.
well, I know. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. I think Hotwire solves some of these problems, but yeah, I don't think it comprehensively solves them all.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, I'm still learning pieces of it, right? So for the people who are saying, "Oh no, it totally solves them," there may be something I'm missing. I'm just going to be honest, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there are definitely some things that I see people doing with, say, a React or an Angular, and we have shows on both of those, right?
Mhm.
We interviewed what's his name, the Svelte guy. Um,
Oh, yeah.
anyway, we had him on JavaScript Jabber. I'm going to remember his name here in a minute, but and he was talking about Svelte 5. So people are seeing problems on the front end that they want to solve that give people a high level of interactivity and give it capabilities that
Mhm.
maybe are a little different with a Rails Hotwire build. So I'd love to talk about, okay, so when you talk about reactivity in, say, a React or a Svelte or whatever,
Mm.
um, what specifically are you looking for?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, specifically
Rich
for my own
Harris.
work.
I'll put a link to the
Right.
episode
Yes,
with Rich
that's who it is. Yes. Yes. He's awesome.
because it came
Um,
out, I mean, literally like a month ago.
right. Yeah, I think I saw it on the feed. Yeah. So the interesting thing about sort of my sort of realization into why the Rails front end needed sort of more help than it was getting from View Component is that I saw a talk at Sin City Ruby. By the way, shout out to Jason Sweat. I know he's been a
Oh
panelist on this
yeah.
podcast before. He did a great job organizing that again for the second year in a row, and got to see a talk by Jason Charnes there where he was talking about how he works at Podia. He'd worked on this like interactive site builder sort of thing where you could kind of make your own website for the courses you're selling. Podia is like a course management and delivery platform, and he had tried to create it in Rails before but as sort of the iteration number one of this thing. And he had used Stimulus and I think probably Hotwire in the back end. I'm not sure. I think there were some turbo frames
Hmm.
involved. And the idea was that you'd go into this site builder and you could, configure blocks of text and put images in there and whatnot and click save. And that would just become, a website that other people would see and they could see your products and your courses and stuff.
Hmm.
And they tried to build that, his company tried to build that, with all those tools that Rails comes with. So Stimulus and um, Hotwire, and
I've wanted that for a
decided
long
not
time
to
myself.
ultimately. What's that?
I've wanted something like that for a long time myself, something I could plug into a Rails app.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. No, completely. And I feel like there's some of those that already exist, but I'm not sure. I don't know if they wanted like a full-on like tiny CMS or whatever solution, or that's not the right tiny MCE, whatever the site builder tool is for like Django, or not Django, for Drupal. But I think he
Yeah.
wants something a little lighter weight than that. So they tried to build it with sort of basic Rails technologies, and then decided to go with React because they couldn't get it they couldn't add all the features they wanted. And I'm kind of glossing over some of the details
Hmm.
there. And unfortunately, that talk wasn't recorded. But if people are curious, I'm sure you can reach out to Jason on Twitter or X. And but I watched him. So what he did during that talk was he described sort of the problem they had, and then he walked through implementing that with Stimulus and with Hotwire, and he live coded the entire thing. And the thing that I remember from the talk is not even really the problem he was solving. The thing that I took away from that is like he just flipped back and forth between like 5 or 6 different files. He had to touch controllers, he had to touch Stimulus, like Rails controllers and Stimulus controllers. He had to like wire up IDs in all these different places. And I was just looking at this going like, holy smokes, this is really complex. And there's lots of little things you have to
Right.
remember to do, right? And again, nothing against those technologies. I know people who have used both Stimulus and Hotwire to great effect. They love it. It's awesome. And I think for certain use cases, it probably does make complete sense to go that route. So I saw that talk, and then it sort of contrasted with my own experience at GitHub, where this is maybe sort of made a splash a couple of months ago, but GitHub has sort of decided to go all in on React. Like a lot of stuff is being rewritten on the front end is being rewritten in React. The core experiences are sort of moving over there.
Oh,
And one of the
interesting.
projects that I was tasked with doing was this global user nav drawer, which is the thing that slides in from the right of the screen when you click on your avatar. There's a bunch of nav links in there, and I've written React before, actually quite a bit of React before at a previous company, and so I dove into that and got that working, and sort of reminded of how awesome React is, right? Like, not necessarily for bundle size, not necessarily for efficiency of rendering, right? But React is awesome from a developer experience perspective. Like, everything's in one file, your HTML and your behavior. It's in one file. Hiding and showing things is a matter of just adding a conditional inside your JSX, right? Like, it's very, and also we were using TypeScript for it. So like all the types were there to help you, guide you toward the right solution. It would compile,
Mhm.
you have a compile error if something was broken. So, lots of just really nice ergonomics sort of that you don't get if you're doing Hotwire, and you don't get if you're doing even something like a web component, right? So after doing that work, there's a couple of projects we also have where we're trying to remediate a bunch of accessibility issues, and I've been put on this V team, this sort of this strategic accessibility unblocker team now, where I'm back on primary view components, and this team and I are creating this thing called a select panel. And the select panel is basically you click a button, a little panel drops down. You can filter the results. It fetches results from the server, displays them, and you can filter them, choose the one you want, submit the choices. And I'm doing this now all in web components with just like basically a very procedural, like imperative JavaScript, the way that a lot of JavaScript used to be written back in the early days of jQuery, whatever, where you like select an element, you can toggle a class on and off, you can grab an element, grab its parent, stick an element in. Like, it's just lots of very sort of fiddly and error-prone DOM manipulation code, right? And contrasting that with what I had done in React, it was just like, whoa, there is a big disconnect, like a big impedance mismatch. That's the wrong term. There's a big like difference between how these feel to write, Um, and I really prefer the React way because it's just so much easier, simpler. Like, it makes more sense to my brain, and not even I wouldn't say more sense. They make the same amount of sense. It's more just like I have to do so much less debugging in the React version because I can
Uh-huh.
declare something like, display this or don't display it, and when the properties or the state of that component change, it re-renders, right? So it's just a much nicer developer experience over there. And it made me, I was initially sort of very against the React migration at GitHub, and sort of made my feelings known, and didn't make a lot of friends that way. But it having now sort of had the dual, and part of that was because, I'll be totally honest, part of that's because I really was sort of invested in view component succeeding, right? I really wanted that to succeed.
Uh-huh.
And again, I don't think I think there's probably a place for both of those tools, right? And there's also a place for Hotwire potentially in there too.
Right.
But what it got me thinking was like, why can we like not have this? Why can't we make components in Ruby that can run in the browser and sort of get a lot of this same sort of cool reactivity that we get from React? Why can't we have that like in a view component or a flex component or
Right.
whatever else? So I'm setting the stage there for what I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, that's a lot of stage, but it's
Yeah.
definitely interesting, right? I mean, what you were talking about, just as the example that you're using here from Jason's talk,
Hmm.
there's a system out there called Builder.
Okay.
So there's builder.io, and their CTO is Mishko Hevery, who created Angular and then later created Quick. And so
Hmm.
builder.io is sort of this front end, build, visual builder front end, so that, yeah, you can add in, this is the text, this is the header, but you've kind of got a component you can put in there, right? And then you've got, maybe you have another component that's columns, and then you have a component that goes in each of the columns, right? And so you just visually
Mm-hmm.
drag and drop. And yeah, like I said, I've wanted to be able to do that in Rails for a while. And yeah, that level of interactivity, just to put your finger on it, would be really, really nice. But yeah, what you're talking about is kind of how I envisioned it working, where I could create a view component in Rails, right? And then have it behave the way that I want it to on the front end. And yeah, I was having trouble figuring out how to do that in a way that makes sense. And what you're talking about with React, where, yeah, essentially you just kind of put all of that together in a component, and then you say, okay, I want this component here and this component here, and they interact and interplay in these ways. Yeah, you know, that's really, really nice. And you can get some of that with the stimulus component or stimulus controllers. You get some of that with Turbo, but it's not always completely seamless, I guess, in the way that React is. And
Yes,
the other piece is ultimately I'd like to be able to just put up my Rails view components and have that level of I don't even know, that level of interactivity or reactivity like you're talking about, where I don't have to go in and code it twice, right?
Right, exactly.
And just have it do what I need it to do, and have it dynamic enough so that I can pull some of this stuff together and make it work. And I haven't given up on that idea, but I don't know what it's going to take to get there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's kind of a lot of like, question marks about how we get to that point. I mean, so there are a couple of, because one of the things I think that maybe is one building block we could talk about is like, how do you get Ruby to execute in the browser, right? That's kind of step number one. Like if I have a view component and it's a Ruby class and it's got a Ruby template associated with it, right? That's the standard view component architecture. How do I get that thing to run in the browser? Do I transpile it to JavaScript? Do I, ship an entire Ruby runtime to the browser? And there's lots of interesting questions there. And there is there's that project ruby.wasm, and I've seen actually Jason Charnes also has a project where he got Ruby running in the browser, which is super cool, running via WASM, right? It's very cool. And you can get basically like a full-on Ruby version running in your browser. You can do IRB, send it commands, it'll spit back results. It's super, super cool. But like that binary WASM file that you're downloading is like, I think 50 megabytes. It's like 30 compressed or something, which is pretty big when all you need to do is render a couple of components. It's pretty heavy, right? So, but that's a super like good option, I think, for people that want to play with it for at the beginning of the process. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if you necessarily. So the kind of the approaches that I've seen to this are, you've got people who essentially have a view component, and then what I've done and I've seen other people do is they put a stimulus controller around it, right? And so then what you do is you get a lot of that interactivity, but it's not necessarily as convenient as say JSX, where it's all in the same file and it all kind of plays nicely, right? The other thing is you have to kind of fiddle with some stuff in order to get sort of the level of dynamic, right? I've had to kind of kludge some stuff together. For example, if it's, hey, I've got this container and then I want random stuff to show up in it, right? I kind of have to play with it a little bit and massage my view components to make it work. It's not impossible and it's not horrible, but it is a little bit messy. And then I've seen people kind of go from that level, you go all the way up to React, and React actually has server components, is that, and they're still working out some of the kinks, but right. So could you have Ruby just server render, right? So you wrote your view in JavaScript or in React, but have it server render those. Or do you go all the way to, hey, here's Ruby in the browser and solve some of those problems? It seems like those are kind of the levels that I'm looking at for some of this.
Yeah.
I always thought too, like there's like a middle ground, right, with like Opal or something like that. That you can even use. Like I thought maybe like with the influx of WASM too, we would see like Opal like revamping up, right? Like people just like dropping Opal in, and then like, okay, now there's like a middle ground that can also run like in browser, like as like a proxy service that does just bridge the gap.
But Opal transpiles to JavaScript, and so it would slide into, you still have that server rendered component, and then you have Opal on top of it, the same way you would have Stimulus or something else.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think Opal could be like Opal could like bring some of that reactivity.
Yeah.
Like if you could listen for like, or I don't know if you could listen for this, but you could define an adder reader, adder writer, and then hook into that. Like when you set an instance variable that could automatically update the component and render the template or something. That could be really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, there are definitely some options there.
Yeah, it has like a document ready like trigger for it, which is helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I should mention too, because Chuck, you mentioned Stimulus controllers, and I realized that I didn't sort of mention this before, but primer view components, the way that we add interactivity to our view components is via web components, which is essentially what Stimulus is also doing. It's like so we have web components.
Yeah, it's a different approach, but
custom element associated with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a different approach, but it's very similar.
Yeah. So web components, just to give people a little bit of background if you're not super familiar, because I know we have people at different levels, so some people may be familiar and some aren't, but web components are actually a standard that you can write custom elements and things like that to. And so it's approach kind of similar to some of the other ones that you'll see out there, but
they're just a really nice way of like encapsulating some JavaScript behavior. So you can say like, you have a JavaScript class, and that corresponds to an HTML element. And then when like click events happen inside that, you can listen for them on the component class itself. You can say like this.add event listener, right? And you'll be able to handle events that happen inside the component. You can also say like this.query selector, just like you can say document.query selector, but so the query selector happens just within that one component, like within that one component and its children. So it's just a nice way of saying I want to scope like all of my JavaScript code to like this one section of the DOM tree, right? And also web components are also really cool because they also provide this shadow DOM concept, just like React sort of introduced back in the early days. So you can have a shadow root attached to your component, and you can stick like CSS styles, for example, in there, and those will only apply to that component. So there's no sort of global CSS anymore, there can be, but most of it is one of the benefits of having a shadow root is you can attach like CSS styles that don't escape the context or the confines of the component. So that's pretty cool too. Right. So we talked about WASM. Oh, go ahead.
I didn't realize that that shadow root mode is compatible in all the browsers. I was worried that yeah, it is. I just looked it up because I was looking at that before, and now it's all green. So
there you go.
Today,
guys. Great. There you go.
Yeah, no, that's the nice thing about
that useful.
It's the nice thing about a lot of those standards is that because the browser vendors are all interested in pulling together and implementing the web standards, when they get adopted, they're usually pretty good about doing that. And web components, they seem to come back into vogue often enough that, people want to see them work.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because like web components are very cool, but they again sort of only solve part of the problem. I think I saw like a post on Mastodon a couple of months ago where it was like, I think it was Dave Copeland, who I think has been on the show before. And he was saying like, I think he's like, basically the title of his article was like, web components are a big nothing burger. Because in his mind, they didn't really add a lot to the table. I mean, so there is that scoping concept we talked about. You can define, a custom element, attach behavior to it. You have the shadow root. Those are cool things, but they don't really, at least in my opinion, they don't really come to like, they don't really meet that level of like awesomeness that is React, right? Or that is, whereas a Vue, right? They don't add that, or even something like Solid. I just was listening to a podcast about Solid the other day. It's pretty cool. So all of that is great. Like web components are awesome, but I don't think they offer the same things that React does. At least they don't come to that level. And so a lot of people are saying like, well, they're great and you can use them in particular circumstances, but they don't really give you the same flexibility that React does. And to that point, I think Stimulus and we actually use this thing at GitHub called Catalyst, which is very similar to Stimulus, where you can like attach, you can put little data targets and stuff on your children of your web component, and then it will automatically have those available as like properties on the component for you, and you can attach event listeners using data action. It's very similar to what Stimulus does. The thing about both of those, though, is that I'm working on this select panel thing I mentioned, I still have to do just a ton of DOM manipulation and manual event listener adding and just like so much messing around. And then I have to like iterate on that constant, like this, trying to get select panel, at least the version we have, trying to get that to support sort of multiple modes for fetching data. Like I wanted to have totally local where it just filters the list that you render from the server. I wanted to have like an eventually local where like it fetches results and then filters those in the browser. And there's also like a fully remote mode where it always fetches every keystroke you're typing in the filter input, right? All of that, like getting all of that working together was such an enormous pain in the butt. And I spent days trying to get that right. And in React, that would have been much, much easier. At least I think it would have been. So that's where my head is at, right? It's just like, I feel like we need to maybe start being a little more honest in the Rails community about like how great React is and like how much better it is than even something like Hotwire. And again, I think there's room for all of these technologies. It's not like we have to pick one, right? Like we can definitely choose all of them together. But anyway, so to the point of like Opal, that was the next thing I was going to mention is like Opal's really cool. Like it transpiles your Ruby to JavaScript, right? Run in the browser. I looked at Opal a little while ago, and the thing that kind of got me was that like you still, like the big standard library that it comes with, it's like 400 or 500K, right? That you're like downloading, and that's just for running some Ruby code. And then the transpilation process of Ruby to JavaScript itself, like you're adding a lot more to the bundle size because it's not just Ruby anymore. It's like Ruby wrapped in JavaScript. So I kind of didn't. I mean, Opal's super cool. Again, not trying to take away from any of these technologies, but it was like a little too heavy for what I was thinking we would want in Rails. And actually, to that point, just a couple of 2 years ago or so, I started working on a Ruby implementation written in JavaScript called Garnet, and Garnet has been a super fun to work on. But it's essentially, it's like a implementation of Ruby, like written in TypeScript, and so you can like, import this thing. And I think it compressed. It's currently, and of course, it's not fully fledged yet. There's not the whole like Ruby standard library in there, but it comes in at like 97K, I think, or something compressed, or a little bit less than that, 60, I think. So it's a lot smaller. There's no transpilation. You don't transpile your Ruby code. You just give it some Ruby code, and it will use the Prism parser to parse it, and then the execution engine in there to run the code. And it sort of just boils down to JavaScript native types at the end of the day. So like the Ruby string class just wraps a JavaScript string, right? Mm-hmm. So that was super fun to work on, or has been. It's definitely not done yet. Lots of bugs still, I'm sure, because writing a Ruby implementation is not an easy thing to do. But it got me fired up about thinking about like, okay, so because all these previous solutions, right? Like WASM is super heavy. Opal's pretty heavy. Like I wanted something not as heavy, right? And so that's what Garnet is supposed to be. So yeah, there's that. I've been thinking about that for a long time. I got like all of the Flex tests passing in Garnet, thinking like maybe we could run a Flex component in the browser. But then just over the last couple of weeks, I've been able to hack together this, what I think is a pretty cool demo of rendering. It's just a Ruby class. So using Garnet, you can load. I'm calling it Nito, like a Nito component, and it's just a class with some instance variables and like some state getters and setters, right? And what it does, it sits on top of lit HTML and lit element, which is another sort of reactive JavaScript framework, really lightweight. And it takes your template, it compiles that into Ruby that calls the lit methods, so like lit.html, and that's how the template gets defined. So again, it's taking your existing, not ERB, it's actually using Rux, which we talked about a little bit on the show before, but you can think of it like ERB. It takes your ERB template, converts that into what lit expects, and the whole thing then runs in the browser and uses web components. So like in the Ruby class instance is like attached, to the web component. And you can do things like define event handlers as Ruby lambdas. So when you click a button, the lambda will run, update the state re-renders the component. So I'm really excited about that. I'm amazed that it works at all, because it shouldn't. Like, you shouldn't be able to do this. But yeah, I've been working on that a lot. I think, yeah, at some point we might be able to actually have like Ruby components running in the browser, whether you're using ruby.wasm or Opal or Garnet or whatever. As long as you have that runtime in there, I think it's possible to like do this, and I think that would be a pretty big leap forward for Rails UI.
Yeah, I 100% agree. This is really cool stuff, by the way. I'm gonna have to like dig into a lot of this later.
Yeah.
But yeah, because I was trying to run one of the hardest things with the whole like WASM aspect of it is like just getting up and running. And there's like so many examples, but like even still, it is still kind of like a hurdle. And I know that they'll keep making that easier, obviously.
Oh, for sure.
But still, yeah, I'm not sold on the idea of using it as like our go-to. Right. It still feels a little clunky.
Right.
And bulky, like you mentioned, like it does, like the packages too, like they add up, and like you don't need the whole Ruby runtime, right, to like run your little component. So it definitely doesn't make sense for everything. Yeah.
Right.
If you're gonna, I just imagine like putting it on a mobile device, or somebody like in like a terrible connection, right? Like that's not a great like start, like especially with everybody using mobile first, right? Like
yeah, no, that's a really good point. Like, actually, do you know who Alex Russell is?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay. He for the longest time has been like railing against modern front end because of how heavy it is, right? And a lot of that, I think, is, well, not a lot. Some of that is attributable to React, right? But it's also just like the bundle sizes in general have just gotten, and even to render a static site, you're loading in just tons of crap, like React and all these things on top of React, and component libraries, and CSS library. I mean, just so much stuff gets crammed in, even if you're just visiting a simple blog site, right? And his thing for a long time has been, this might work fine if you live in a developed country like the US, and you're even then, if you're not in a big city, sometimes your experience can be not as great as it could be, right? But what he's really thinking about is people who live in developing countries. Like, Google has this project I think they call it like the next billion users, and they're saying that, like, the number of people online right now is only, I don't know, a third of the whole world population, or half or something. And the next billion people that come online are going to be doing so on mobile, on terrible connections, with crappy devices, because they live in these developing countries that are just coming online now, right? And I think that they were saying this back in like 2015 or whatever. So it's been a long time since then. I'm sure a lot of people have come online, but it to the point where they were saying it was like 300,000 people or something were coming online every day, right? Like, it was a crazy pace of like more people getting added to the internet over the last couple of years. And Alex's point, I think, to a large degree, has been the experience that those people have with your blog that has 10 megabytes of JavaScript delivered to the browser is just a terrible experience. Their phone can't even load that page because it's so heavy. And to the extent that the bits actually flow to their browser, they flow slowly because they have a terrible connection, because it's like 2G speeds. So his rallying cry lately has been like, let's just make the web less bloated, like, because it's going to be a much worse experience for everybody, really, but especially those people who are coming online in developing countries. And I have to say that really sort of resonates with me, because I have visited certain developing countries and have seen sort of firsthand how sort of difficult it is for people to get internet connections. I went visited Peru back in like 2010, granted, a long time ago. And the only way you could really get internet in Peru was via an internet cafe. That's all that they really had for you. You couldn't get it in your house unless you knew somebody like at the ISP who could like hook you up, right? So I'm sure things have changed, but it's just worth considering, I think, that large portion of the population that won't be able to visit your site, or will visit a site that loads very slowly because, they have a bad connection, bad device.
Yeah,
I say bad, I mean low end.
I think we had a very similar conversation with Alex last year when we were talking about web performance, and he basically pointed out, if I remember correctly, that you still can't count on a great connection for
that's true.
in the world.
That's a good point. Even in developed countries, it's hard to sometimes. I mean, if you're behind a big building or something in San Francisco, even then sometimes you have problems, getting a page to load or a signal out. So for sure. Yeah.
So we've been talking about this for about 35 minutes if I look at the clock on the recording. And I guess there are two questions that are kind of coming to mind, and we've kind of been, I think, circling around them a little bit. One of them is, okay, so what do we do now, right? What? Because we've kind of talked through all the different options that are out there, but what do we do now, and what can we contribute to now that will move the state of the art? And then two, where do you think we end up? Right? Do we solve this with Vue components that are front end enabled, or are we going to just wind up kind of settling back into something like a React, or Stimulus will get better, or I don't even know, right? WASM gets smaller on its package size or whatever.
Yeah, good questions, man. So what can we do now? I think that like Rails is sort of uniquely positioned to sort of be the less heavyweight framework of choice, like, because in the Rails sort of in the Rails way of doing things, but you're not really shipping a giant front end. You're just you're shipping some HTML, and there's some JavaScript sprinkles. So I would think that Rails in general is like, now people can load whatever JavaScript libraries they want to into the front end from a Rails app, of course, but sort of by default, Rails is pretty lightweight compared to React or Gatsby or anything else that uses React or Vue or Svelte or whatever. So because it's not just about bundle size. It's also about how long does it take the browser to interpret your JavaScript, like load that up, parse it, load it, do whatever actions are necessary to init it, right, to initialize it. So, it's all that stuff. It's sort of as a whole that impacts performance. So, but I think Rails is uniquely positioned for this. Maybe not uniquely, but certainly well positioned for this. Like other frameworks that are sort of more classic in the way they deliver front end experiences, like Django, is probably also similar in that regard. So, yeah, what can we do? Mostly, what I think I would like people to think about is that if you don't need to use interactivity, if you don't need interactivity, if you don't need, a super dynamic experience, like don't use React for everything, don't use Vue for everything. Don't use Hotwire for everything. Like choose the thing that is going to solve your particular problem, and in sort of the least amount of front end code you can, right? There are going to be some things that really do need that full on interactivity that React brings, and that's totally fine. Like, use React for that. It's a little hard because React does kind of want to take over the whole page, so there is kind of a
that's usually the
considerations there. Yeah, for sure. I don't know about other frameworks, but I know React for sure is like that. So, but there's lots of interesting work being done now about React islands, and Quick, I think, has this kind of partial hydration concept where you can just hydrate part of the page at a time with your components that are coming from the JavaScript coming from the server. It's going to render those components. So yeah.
Well, and you've got Astro as well, which implements the islands architecture, and you can you kind of box it in kind of a little bit.
Right. So yeah, I guess what I'm really advocating for is just think about what you actually need. You don't need to be using React for your blog, for example. Like use Jekyll for your blog. Just give people HTML. It's going to be lightning fast. You don't need any JavaScript runtime for that. Just some HTML and some CSS should be enough for that, right?
Yeah, this reminds me this reminds me of like kind of who we're building things for in this specific case, right? Like I feel like most people working on like the Rails front end side as like as the Rails app starts to grow like beyond just like, oh, I built this thing, right? Like you get people that are all front end, right, who aren't necessarily familiar with Rails, and they can come up to the speed like enough. Like View component is a great example of that, right? Like, sure, they learn how to like read ERB or how the templating syntax is a little bit different, but it's still like kind of a bottleneck. And I know that there are now like kind of ways that View component like addresses these specific cases, but it's still like, you know, a sidestep, right? Like it removes them from their like typical flow, and it's like,
that's true.
You know, a new DSL they have to learn, right?
Right.
And I just keep like thinking about the older days of how Rails used to answer this with like Rails assets, right? Where like every JS package was like a gem, and you just say, okay, like I'm using this gem as a or this JavaScript package as a gem instead, right? And it honestly worked pretty well.
It was cool. Yeah.
It was cool. I mean, I wouldn't want to like continue that now, but like I feel like just that idea of you know, catering to the audience and just keeping things like in their realm, like that solved the problem the best, right? Because it made it available for both, right? Like it made the Rails developers happy because they could introduce new things to the people that needed them, right? And then it just showed up in the Rails asset pipeline, which now doesn't exist, but you know, it consolidated things in an easy way. So I feel like there's a happy path there. I don't know what it is, but I feel like we're like highlighting a lot of it now, right? Like I'm worried that we're just like reintroducing like the same things of like, all right, just like a new DSL, right? That's like really just outside of what people are using.
Yeah, no, that's a super good point. I just saw somebody on Mastodon say this too, where like the more you stick with kind of the Rails defaults, the better off you're going to be, basically, because somebody can come in and make changes right away. You know.
Well, and a lot of that stuff is designed to kind of ergonomically, I guess, or developer experience align, and so your thought processes can follow a common pattern.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I guess what I've been thinking lately is like, I feel like as an industry, maybe not as much in the Rails world, I'd have to pull people, but like we've sort of decided that components are good, right? Generally speaking. Do you want to use them everywhere? I don't know. Maybe not. Like in React, you pretty much have no choice. You have to use components everywhere. But in Rails, right, you can use a view component in the middle of a partial. You can render a partial from a view component, right? Like you can mix and match. Rails is omakase, right? So I think that's a nice sort of way to, and at GitHub, like that's also how adoption has happened, where people have just been like, I think view component's great. Maybe I want to reuse this bit of UI logic. I'm going to wrap it in a view component, but the rest of my UI like stays as templates and stays as partials. I think that's totally fine. But in general, it feels like components are kind of a thing that we've kind of decided on the web, at least, are a good idea. And I feel like we've also sort of centered on this idea that reactivity is good too, because that's maybe the biggest thing that React gave us. Like, sure, React gave us JSX. Sure, React gave us adding behavior to DOM elements or whatever, but it also just gave us this reactivity idea, and that sort of just changed a lot of what web development could be, right? So those two things, components and reactivity, I think if we have those two things in the front end, but we don't maybe put too many like limitations on that. Like we don't say you need to use this syntax instead of ERB, or you need to use this component framework, right? If you just let people render strings basically, or like define a template however they want, then there's not this sort of artificial, like you have to use this framework du jour. Because like one thing that I think is just so funny about React in particular is like people don't put like I solve problems. I solve web design problems. I solve problems my customers have. They don't put that stuff on their resume. They put like, I'm a React developer on the resume, right? And to me, that's just absolutely wild, because like React is a technology. It's a library. It's not like the way to solve or a way to solve problems, I guess. Or it's like, how do I put this? You're not a React developer. You're a programmer who happens to use React in your job, right? You can use React to solve problems. You've seen it before. Rails is the same way. So like, sure, add that to your like list of skills, but like what you actually do is solve problems, you know? This is coming up more and more now, where people, even at GitHub, people will apply, and even people will say, I don't really want to write Rails UI because I don't want to put that on my resume. I want to put React experience on my resume. And I'm just like, man, I don't feel like that is what you should be doing on your resume. I feel like you should be putting things like, here's the cool product that I shipped, and it just sort of incidentally used Rails or incidentally used React. So anyway,
we fall victim to that in Rails and Ruby too, right? Like,
sure.
I'm a Rails developer,
Absolutely.
But employers fall victim to it too, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So they and that's where, so I'm a Rails developer because the employer knows that they want a Rails developer, and so I'm speaking the language that they're putting out into the world. And anyway, so,
no, that's
a lot of times, they're too short-sighted to even recognize, hey, this person's been building apps on the web for 80 years. It's not that long, but you get my point, right? And so they could probably pick up our stack within a couple of months, and then we would benefit from all of that experience they have in solving a lot of these same kinds of problems.
Yeah, exactly. Because like the web works the same no matter what framework you're using, right? Like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, like there's not that much different in these frameworks. And if you know how that stuff works and interacts with each other, then you're probably going to be able to pick up sort of any stack that they have. Like I've picked up, Elixir work and JavaScript and Ruby and Python. Like, it's and it really, at the end of the day, it's really not that different. So
no,
I don't know what
some parts of. I mean, I like Rails, and there are parts of it that I definitely appeal to me. But yeah, fundamentally, a lot of the problems are the same.
It did make me think about a topic I'm really interested to find out what you think of, Cameron.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that's because one of the big things that I really liked of React when GraphQL started like ramping up was their like blend of basically data causing the reactivity. What are your thoughts on like the coupling of like data like driven like front end changes and vice versa, and like where that blend lies, and like maybe where we could start like digging into that?
Yes. Oh, that's such a good question. Right, because I think it was like a lot back in the day, maybe not so much anymore. You would like go to like a React like tutorial, and they'd be like, here's some data hard coded into your component, like as a JSON object, or like render this, and it would show. And there was no conversation at all about like how you get that data from the server, right? So like you'd get to this point where you're like, okay, I can render this component, I can write this, but like, how do I get and none of these tutorials would ever go to that place. They would never say like, okay, now here's the backend code that you should try to get standing up, right? So that's a great question, and like that's sort of another place where Rails developers know where to get data from. Active record object, pass that into your view component maybe, or pass that into your template and render the properties from that. Yeah, so like we know how to do that, sort of maybe more than a lot of JavaScript people do. But the question I think is like, how do you sort of efficiently get that data from the back end to the front end? Do you stand up like a Rails API or something where you're responding in JSON? That's certainly a way to do it. One of the really nice things about Hotwire is that you don't have to worry about that because the server is generating the HTML. You're just jamming into the DOM. So there's no worrying about like, how do I get the data? All you do is just get HTML. So, it's a really nice benefit there where you don't have to like think about getting data to the front end. What I would love to see at some point is for someone to figure out, and I think this is probably already possible, is to figure out how you could sort of hook up React or hook up, this Nito thing or whatever to like broadcasts from Action Cable. So like when something changes, in the back end, it serializes that to JSON and then sends it to your page via PubSub like automatically, and then your component updates based on that. So if you could say like in your component, like subscribe to channel whatever. I haven't used Action Cable. I'm gonna come across as an idiot right now, but like, some directive in your component that knows how to listen to these events and then update the DOM from that. I think that could be super, super cool.
That would be awesome.
Stimulus Reflex do something like that?
Oh, is that okay? I actually have not looked at Stimulus Reflex.
I think so.
That's generally the idea behind it, and
cool.
it works exactly. So it uses cable ready behind the scenes,
awesome. Okay.
and then when stuff gets updated, then anyway,
that's awesome.
I have to admit I have not used it either. Nate Hopkins and Eric Berry they're local guys that I've known forever.
Yeah.
And they've done a lot of this. In fact, I'm trying to get Nate to come on the show and just talk about all the stimulus magic that he's doing, because it's awesome. But so I'm pretty sure that's how that works. It is exactly what you're talking about. And but on the other end, I mean, what you're talking about on the front end is, okay, I've got the data, right? So now I have to set up if I'm using stimulus, right? If it's sending it back over via in JSON and not HTML, where Turbo can update it, then I have to program my stimulus controller to know update here and here and here and here, right? And so what you're starting to see with Angular just implemented this. What's the one that? Anyway, so you've got signals now on the front end, right? And so you've got this reactivity that's coming the other way. So the way that it used to work was with observers. And so you had like RxJS. And so what it would do is it's kind of like the enumerable module in Ruby is kind of the way I think about it, right? Where you can pass, map, compact, and you keep getting this array of things with them. It's an array of essentially it's events. I can't remember the exact term that they call it, but so then it would trickle through to everything that's subscribed to those events, right? That event stream. But Signals works the other way, where essentially it says everything that's bound to this value, when I update this value, it updates everything that. And so it's really slick. It's very fast. So anyway, so there are a lot of options on the front end that kind of can tie into what we're talking about with this. Here are the updates.
That's
do
really
your thing, right?
Right. That's super good to know, because I do think we kind of want a data binding story of some kind there, right?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think in some instances, I mean, Turbo's great, right? So I ran across an article, I think it was Alexandre Rubin. He wrote an article that was basically hey, I wrote a Stimulus and Turbo pop-up search feature, right? And so it does a modal pop-up, and then it has a bar where you can type your search term into, right? And so when you when you type it in, then it automatically goes back and it uses Turbo frames to load in your search results in your modal, right? So it's real slick, and it's this nice feature that you would love to see on like every website you use. And so I was like, oh wow, that's really nice, right? But just to kind of for the things that aren't quite so, hey, just replace this with this, it's like you're talking about, hey, the data's been updated, somebody typed a chat message, what have you, right? You don't necessarily need, or in a lot of cases want, Turbo to do that work. Maybe you do, and maybe it's fast enough. I think it depends on your problem, but just have here's your data, boom, and have it fan out, and it does it through whatever JavaScript mechanism is the state of the art these days.
Yeah, completely. I'm giving a talk at the SF Ruby meetup on the 16th, and like I'm trying to get like a to-do list, the classic to-do list example, working with Garnet and Nito and all that stuff, just to show that if just made for myself mostly, to see if it's like possible, right? And by the way, shout out to Evil Martians and Irina Nazarova, who's been putting together. She's revived the SF Ruby meetups. They're happening again, so that's cool.
Didn't we have her
but like, so I'm trying to get that working. I think she's been on the podcast.
Yeah. I don't know that we had Irina. We had
somebody from
Victoria.
Oh, was it Victoria?
Yeah.
I think Vladimir Dementyev has been on as well.
Yeah.
He works at Evil Martians. So anyway, my thoughts there have been like, I want to get that working, but I've been thinking like, how do I get it so, because there's no data binding story in Nito at all right now. And I'm like, how do I sort of do this? Would it make sense to like when you want to add a new item or edit an item, I guess I'm already adding one. If I want to add a new item, I submit a request to the server saying add this item, but then does the server respond with like all the items that I should be seeing, or does it just respond with the one that I added and I have to append that somehow? Like in the React world, right, you would just re-render the whole template, so you would need all of those items, or what, I guess you could do it that way. But the other option now that I'm thinking about is like just go add the item and don't worry about the response and just let the broadcast of the pub sub handle adding the item. That could be really cool.
Yeah. So signals first showed up in Solid.js, and
yeah,
I'm trying to remember the guy.
And then React kind of copied them. Yeah. Oh, I just there's a JS Party podcast about that I'm just now listening to. What is his name? I feel like it's Alex something also. Oh no, Ryan Carniato.
Yeah, Ryan Carniato, and I talked to him at a conference in Amsterdam last June, and just for hours. And then I listened to him talk to somebody else. I can't remember who we were sitting with at the speaker dinner, but it was awesome. And it's just like, oh wow, these ideas. Yeah, I'd love to see something like that. Angular just fully adopted signals, and they're doing it in a way to where they're basically encouraging people to have a hard look at how they're using RxJS, which is how they did it before. And say, where can you use signals because it'll be faster and more efficient and solve a whole bunch of these things, right?
Yeah,
so
totally.
Anyway,
so it sounds like signals is the way to go, which I guess you could also say is like pub sub, right? Like you're getting a signal from the server. Yeah, cool.
But yeah.
Well, so I think to Valentino's point, if we could, and I say we, I mean the JavaScript or the Ruby community, if we could get like a compelling sort of answer to React that lets you write components in Ruby, has a data binding story, is efficient, and I think, and one thing I also, I know we're getting close to an hour here. One thing I also wanted to mention is like a lot of JavaScript frameworks, right? The idea is that you render the component on the client. And a lot of JavaScript frameworks are now thinking like, okay, well, wait a minute. We probably should also render on the server, because the server, we can control that environment. It's going to be very fast. We can optimize it. We can add more memory if you want to, right? Can't do that with browsers. So it'd be cool if we could like paint something on the screen faster than our JavaScript bundle loads. So let's do server-side rendering. And which always made me laugh, because it's just like, that's how the web used to work. Everything was server-side rendered, right? But I think if we do this in Ruby, right, you sort of automatically get server-side rendering without, so it's like the opposite way of looking at it. It's like, I want server-side rendering. I already have that. Now I want client-side, versus the other one, which is like I have client, I want server. So because we're already good at that, like because Ruby Rails is already good at that, we sort of already have server-side rendering. So we're like almost already ahead of the curve in that regard.
Right.
So, cool.
I'm really interested to see how the AI hand reaches in here too, right? Like, because if we have like all of these like component like driven things, right? Like we could just say like, hey, like create a bunch of components for this data and just have it like do that in runtime. Like that would be awesome.
Ooh, that would be super cool. Yeah, like give me a to-do list component right now. Just render
right, exactly.
Yeah,
right.
That'd be super cool.
Yeah.
We should also not to say. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say we should also try to work crypto in somehow, right? Because that's
there we go.
Every component can be bought as an NFT too.
There we go. There we go.
Right. Yeah. Well, I really do like the idea if there was some way to translate my view components in Rails up into a component in the front end, right? But without having to do the work, I don't want to write it twice. So I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really kind of what you have to do these days, right? Yeah.
So I just posted in the comments again. And by the way, the comments go out to Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. But we did an interview last year, right when signals were hitting, and not a lot has really changed. I mean, the adoption and some of the implementations changed, but the idea is still the same. We talked to Tejas Kumar about signals. And so if you want to look into that, he explains pretty deeply how that all goes. I wish we had done it with Ryan Carniato, but we just didn't. So
Yeah, I mean, talking about other things, or talking about things that like we sort of have decided are good, like components, reactivity, but also signals. I feel like signals are also one of those things that you sort of like all the major frameworks use signals now, right?
They are all adopting them, and it solves a lot of issues that
it does.
Kind of came up in, okay, how do I keep track of state from this to this to this to this?
Yep.
So
totally.
All right. Well, I'm going to push us toward picks. We've been talking for an hour. It's been great. And I would love to just kind of see, I almost want to just say, hey, let's just do this every 6 months and just see where we're at. But
yeah.
Anyway, let's go ahead and do picks. Valentino, do you have some picks for us?
Sure. I've been following along a little bit on the Twitter of Ruby Kaigi. It's always great to see all the brilliant talks that come out of that. I didn't attend anything virtual. I don't know that I had anything virtual, but I just like seeing all the presentations and projects getting worked on. It's pretty fantastic. Next to that, I got a little. I bought the Rabbit R1 and it came in the mail. And I've been using a fully local wearable AI from the Edu project. This has been really fun. So I want to compare and contrast and see maybe what one advantage is over the other. And digging into the AI, I've been reading through Obi Fernandez's new book, The Patterns of Application Development Using AI, and just some super fantastic like abstractions and ways to use AI in the Ruby context and build apps. It's really remarkable book. So highly recommend it.
Awesome. I didn't even know he had a new book. So now I feel we should get him on and have him just explain it all to us. I'm going to throw out a couple of picks. One pick that I always do a board game pick. So I'm going to pick it's actually a card game. It's called Hanabi. And it's a fast, easy game. And effectively what it is you have a set of fireworks, and there are 5 colors of fireworks. And what you do is you deal out 4 cards to each player. And I guess Hanabi is the word for fireworks in Japanese. Anyway, it's a cooperative game. And I'm not always keen on cooperative games because what happens is you'll have quarterbacking where, somebody basically is just telling you what to do. So if you play Pandemic with my wife, I shouldn't, she doesn't listen to the show, but she does a lot of quarterbacking. In fact, there's another game that we play called Castle Panic, and I don't enjoy playing it with her because I don't get to play. I just watch her play. My turn. So anyway, that said, Hanabi is a little bit different. And, in all these games, you can overrule, right? If it's your turn, you can overrule them. And so sometimes I'll say, I think this is a better idea. But Hanabi's different. So what you do is you deal out the cards, and then you hold the cards up facing everybody else. So you don't know what cards are in your hand. And then what you do is you're trying to get the colors to go from 1 to 5. And there are 3 1s, 2 2s, 2 3s, 2 4s, and 1 5. And so what happens is you can discard a card out of your hand, you can play a card out of your hand, or you can give a clue to somebody else if you have enough time tokens. And so you play a time token and you say, these are both 2s, or this is a white card, or right, or whatever. And you can only clue numbers or colors. And if you clue a number or a color, you have to tell them what all of the cards are in their hand of that kind. And so you're trying to give them clues that will get them to play the 1s and then the 2s and then the 3s. But everybody's piles, right? And so the other thing is if you play a card that's already been played, right, then it's a bad play. And there's a fuse. You have 3 parts of the fuse, and once they're gone, you explode and you lose. So the other way to lose is, right, if you discard both numbers or all the numbers of a specific color and number, right? So if you discard any of your 5s, you lose because you can't win. And so anyway, so me and my friends, we played it like 3 or 4 rounds last night. We played some other games too, but This is one of my favorites. It's fun. It's hard. It's freaking hard, right? Because sometimes they'll say these are both white, or they'll say this is a 4, and you're like, okay, are you telling me that I can get rid of it, right? Because when you discard a card, you get the time tokens back from giving a clue. If you play it, but if you play a card and it's wrong, or you get rid of a card you need, right? And so it's, are you telling me to keep it? Are you telling me to get rid of it? Are you telling me to, hold on to it? Or are you just trying to help me know that I have it, right, for the future? And so anyway, it's way, way fun. So I'm going to pick Hanabi. Super, super simple game. I'll put the Board Game Geek list up, and then I'll put an Amazon affiliate link up. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.69, which means that if you're a casual gamer, this is right up your alley. It's so fun. So anyway, I'm going to pick that. I went on way too long about that game. As far as other picks go, there's a challenge that I want to join next week. So one of my favorite books is Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And there's a marketing guy named Russell Brunson who is putting together a 3-day challenge based on the book. And I don't have the link right off the bat, but I will put it up in the show notes so you can join it. That will probably also be an affiliate link. I think I have an affiliate link for that. It's free. It's a free challenge. So I only get paid if you buy something after you sign up for it. And even then it doesn't cost you anything extra. I just get a cut of the action. So anyway, I'm super excited about that. And then, go sign up for Ruby Geniuses. That's rubygeniuses.com. We're going to be doing weekly calls talking about Ruby. I'm hoping to get brilliant people to come join, but I'm playing with this stuff all the time. So I'll probably be doing some of the presentations about how I'm deploying or doing front end or whatever. So definitely check that out as well. And those are my picks. Cameron, what are your picks?
Sorry, I was just going to rubygeniuses.com. Let's see. My first pick is going to be the Prism parser. And I know that it's been talked about a lot on various podcasts. Kevin Newton did. Not I think. He did do a talk on it at RubyConf in November last year. But Prism is amazing. And if you haven't heard of it before, it's a new parser written in C that he and a couple of other people at Shopify have been working on. The idea is that it's going to replace all the other myriad of parsers that exist out there for Ruby, like the White Quark one, and I think Seattle RB, Ryan Davis has one also. So the idea being it's going to replace those, and eventually it'll also replace the C Ruby parser. I think it already has. Or at least it's there. I don't know if it's actually being used. I think you have to switch it on, but it's available. The cool thing about it is that there's also WASM bindings for it. So that's what my little Ruby implementation is using. It's using this like prism.wasm, and he's got TypeScript types for it. I think mostly for Opal, because Opal's going to use it too. But I mean, I just found it to be, because what I was doing before that project came out, what Garnet would do is it would like compile the Ruby code into an instruction sequence like on the server, and then ship like a JSON file that it would then read the instructions from. And now it doesn't have to do that. It can do all of that in the browser, just all the parsing and everything in the browser now via prism.wasm. So huge like shout. He just made like that. I think it's not like a exaggeration to say that Kevin like made Garnet possible, right? And he's also been getting sort of lots of accolades from other people who work on Ruby implementations like Truffle Ruby and JRuby and all the other ones that need a parser. So that's really cool. I also really appreciate just how much time he dedicated to helping me figure that out during the Rails or the RubyConf hack day. So one of the things that happened that was different from how RubyConf normally runs is that they had a hack day at the beginning. The first day of the conference was a hack day. There weren't any talks. And you would just go into a room and meet these luminaries in the Ruby community and talk to them. So I got to talk to him. I got to talk to Amir Rajan, who does Dragon Ruby. That was super fun. So I guess my pick is Prism. Maybe the second pick is RailsConf or RubyConf Hack Day. And then I think my third pick is going to be Sin City Ruby, which is Jason Sweat's conference. It was really fun. Just great to get out, go to the Vegas, have a good time in Vegas, and see some cool talks. Obi Fernandez was there actually talking about AI and Ruby. That was super interesting too. So yeah, I think that sums it up.
Awesome. So Cameron, if people want to check in with you, if they have questions or anything, where do they find you?
Yeah, I have a website, CameronDutro.com. I don't really post there that much. It's just a blog. I'm also on Mastodon, Camertron at ruby.social, and I'm on X too, although I don't use X very much, at Camertron. GitHub.com, Camertron. I'm basically Camertron everywhere on the internet.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks for coming, Cameron. This was awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah,
Until next time,
great
folks.
chatting.
Max.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.